Welcome back, everyone. Today, we are diving into a question that quietly challenges everything we think we know about history. Not through legends or myths, but through evidence, real discoveries that seem slightly out of place in time. What happens when an object, a structure, or a piece of knowledge appears far more advanced than the era it supposedly belongs to? This is where our story begins. Throughout history, archaeologists and researchers have uncovered evidence that does not quite fit the timeline we were taught. In some cases, ancient tools display levels of precision that seem difficult to achieve without modern techniques. In others, architectural remains suggest advanced planning, mathematical understanding, or engineering skills that appear suddenly, without clear signs of gradual development. These findings do not rewrite history on their own, but they raise important questions. The traditional view of human progress assumes a steady, upward path, simple tools evolving into complex technology over time. Yet some discoveries seem to break that pattern. They appear too refined, too sophisticated, or too efficient for the period they are assigned to. When this happens, explanations are often simplified, coincidence, luck, or lost methods that we no longer understand. But these answers do not always fully satisfy the mystery. What makes this evidence especially intriguing is not that it proves an advanced ancient world, but that it suggests our timeline may be incomplete. Knowledge can be lost. Skills can disappear. Entire chapters of human development may fade due to natural disasters, cultural collapse, or simple neglect. If progress can move forward, it can also move backward. So today, we begin by examining the idea that some historical evidence may be ahead of its time. Not to claim impossible theories, but to explore the possibility that history is more complex and more fragile than we often assume. And as we continue, one question will guide us forward. What else might we have forgotten? Across the world, certain ancient artifacts have puzzled researchers because they seem to reflect knowledge or skill levels far beyond what is expected for their historical period. These objects are not myths or isolated rumors. They are physical items that exist in museums, excavation sites, and academic records. What makes them unusual is not their age, but the level of understanding required to create them. Some artifacts display precision that would normally require advanced measuring tools. Perfectly symmetrical shapes, extremely fine engravings, and complex geometrical patterns appear in cultures that supposedly lacked metal instruments or formal mathematical systems. In other cases, materials were combined in ways that suggest an advanced awareness of chemistry or material science, even though written records from the same era make no mention of such knowledge. There are also objects whose purpose remains unclear. Certain mechanisms, decorative items, or tools do not match any known daily activity of their time. They seem too specialized to be experimental, yet too refined to be accidental. When researchers attempt to recreate these objects using period-appropriate tools, they often find the process far more difficult than expected. Standard explanations usually suggest that ancient people were simply more skilled than we assume, or that techniques were passed down orally and later forgotten. While these ideas are reasonable, they do not always explain the sudden appearance of highly advanced artifacts without clear developmental stages. Progress, in most cases, leaves behind a trail of improvement, mistakes, and gradual refinement. Some artifacts appear without that trail. This creates an uncomfortable gap in the historical narrative. If these objects truly belong to their assigned eras, then ancient societies may have possessed forms of knowledge that were lost long before written history could preserve them. Rather than rewriting history, these artifacts invite us to look closer, question assumptions, and accept that human knowledge may have risen, fallen, and vanished more often than we realize. For a long time, history has been presented as a straight line of progress. According to this view, humanity moves steadily forward, with each generation becoming more knowledgeable and technologically capable than the last. Stone tools lead to metal, metal leads to machines, and machines lead to modern technology. This framework is simple, logical, and easy to teach, but it may not tell the full story. When evidence appears that seems too advanced for its time, It directly challenges this linear model. Instead of a smooth upward path, history begins to look uneven, marked by sudden leaps, pauses, and even reversals. Some civilizations appear to reach impressive levels of organization, engineering, or scientific understanding, only for that knowledge to fade or disappear entirely in later periods. Archaeological layers sometimes show this clearly. A sophisticated culture may be followed by simpler tools and reduced architectural complexity, suggesting a loss rather than an improvement of skills. Environmental changes, resource depletion, conflicts, or societal collapse can interrupt progress, forcing people to focus on survival instead of innovation. Over time, techniques that were once mastered may no longer be remembered or needed. This perspective reframes how we interpret advanced discoveries from the past. Instead of asking how ancient people achieved something impossible, the better question may be why that knowledge did not survive. Progress is not guaranteed, and intelligence alone does not protect a society from decline. Without stable conditions, even advanced systems can unravel quickly. By questioning the assumption of constant advancement, history becomes more human and more fragile. It allows for the possibility that civilizations can rise to remarkable heights and still leave behind incomplete legacies. Evidence that does not fit the timeline may not be an exception, it may be a reminder that progress is cyclical, vulnerable, and far less predictable than we once believed. When unusual discoveries emerge, they are often filtered through established historical frameworks. Mainstream history relies on timelines built from accumulated evidence, patterns, and consensus. This system works well in most cases, but it becomes strained when objects or structures do not align neatly with what is already accepted. Instead of fitting the evidence to the timeline often dictates how the evidence is interpreted. As a result, some anomalies are labeled as outliers or described in overly cautious terms. An artifact may be classified as ceremonial rather than functional, or its precision may be attributed to exceptional craftsmanship without deeper investigation. In some cases, dating methods are questioned or adjusted to bring the discovery closer to what seems reasonable. These approaches are not necessarily dishonest, but they reflect the difficulty of addressing findings that challenge long-held assumptions. There is also the issue of specialization. Archaeology, history, engineering, and material science often operate in separate spheres. A discovery that requires knowledge across multiple disciplines can be hard to fully evaluate. What appears ordinary to one field may seem extraordinary to another, leading to incomplete explanations or unresolved debates. Public attention adds another layer of complexity. When anomalies are presented without careful context, they can attract exaggerated claims or unsupported theories. To avoid confusion, academic discussions may remain cautious or limited, leaving many questions unanswered. This caution, while understandable, can create the impression that certain topics are being avoided rather than explored. Ultimately, the struggle is not about denying evidence, but about fitting it into a coherent narrative. History aims to be stable and reliable, yet the past itself is messy and fragmented. Anomalies remind us that historical understanding is always provisional, shaped by the evidence we have and constrained by the frameworks we use to interpret it. One of the most puzzling aspects of ancient history is the sudden appearance of advanced engineering. Massive stone structures, precisely aligned buildings, and complex infrastructure emerge in certain regions with little evidence of gradual experimentation beforehand. These achievements suggest careful planning, deep practical knowledge, and organized labor, yet the early stages of development are often missing or unclear. In many cases, the scale of construction alone raises questions. Transporting heavy materials over long distances, shaping them with high accuracy, and assembling them into stable structures require more than simple trial and error. Such projects demand standardized methods, trained specialists, and an understanding of forces, balance, and durability. However, in some historical records, these capabilities seem to appear fully formed. Traditional explanations propose that earlier attempts simply did not survive or have yet to be discovered. While this is possible, it does not always account for the level of refinement seen in the earliest known examples. Usually, new technologies leave behind imperfect versions, abandoned experiments, or transitional designs. When these are absent, the origin of the knowledge becomes harder to trace. Another possibility is that engineering expertise was inherited from earlier cultures that declined or migrated. Skills may have been passed down through practice rather than writing, making them vulnerable to loss when societies changed. Over time, only the final results remain, while the learning process disappears from the archaeological record. These engineering achievements do not suggest impossibility, but they do suggest continuity we can no longer see. They hint at earlier foundations that have been erased by time, environment, or human activity. When advanced engineering appears without clear origins, it challenges us to consider how much of history has been lost and how much remains undiscovered beneath the surface. In most cases, technological progress leaves behind a visible path. Early versions are simpler, less efficient, and often flawed. Over time, improvements accumulate, leading to more refined and effective designs. This pattern helps historians trace how ideas evolve. However, some ancient technologies seem to break this rule, appearing suddenly in highly developed forms without clear predecessors. Certain tools and methods show a level of optimization that suggests long-term experimentation. Their designs appear finalized, as if shaped by repeated testing and refinement. Yet earlier prototypes, mistakes, or transitional forms are rarely found alongside them. This absence creates a gap between what should exist and what has actually been discovered. One explanation is that development occurred using materials that did not survive. Wood, plant fibers, or other organic substances degrade easily, leaving no trace after centuries. If early experimentation relied heavily on such materials, the physical record would be incomplete. Still, this does not fully explain why the most advanced examples endured while all earlier stages vanished. Another possibility is that knowledge was concentrated among small groups. If techniques were closely guarded or limited to specialists, their disappearance could happen quickly if those groups were lost. Without written documentation, complex processes could vanish within a generation. What remains would be the final product, disconnected from its origins. These technologies challenge the assumption that innovation always spreads slowly and visibly. They suggest that progress can be fragile, localized, and easily erased. When developmental trails are missing, it does not mean they never existed. It means the record we rely on is incomplete. And in that incompleteness, history leaves room for unanswered questions about how much knowledge once existed and how quietly it disappeared. History is often presented as a continuous narrative, but the evidence suggests it may be fragmented. In many regions, there are clear gaps where records abruptly stop, cultures vanish, or technological capabilities decline. These breaks raise the possibility that human history includes resets periods when progress was interrupted, forcing societies to begin again with limited resources and knowledge. Natural events play a major role in these disruptions. Floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and climate shifts can destroy cities and erase infrastructure in a short time. When survival becomes the priority, specialized knowledge may no longer be preserved. Over generations, skills that once required training and coordination can fade into obscurity. There are also cultural resets caused by migration, conflict, or political collapse. When populations disperse or leadership systems fail, organized knowledge networks break down. Writing systems can be abandoned, and traditions may lose their original meaning. What remains is often a simplified version of a once more complex society. Archaeological layers sometimes reflect this pattern. Advanced settlements are found beneath simpler ones, suggesting not a steady rise but a cycle of growth and decline. These layers do not imply that history restarted completely, but they hint at repeated interruptions that reshaped human development. Missing chapters challenge the confidence of established timelines. They suggest that what we call earlier primitive may sometimes come after periods of greater complexity. Instead of a single march forward, history may resemble a series of waves, each one building, breaking, and leaving fragments behind. Recognizing these gaps does not weaken our understanding of the past, it deepens it. It reminds us that history survives only where conditions allow it, and much of it may be lost forever, leaving behind silence where entire stories once existed. Throughout history, entire societies have been shaped and sometimes erased by sudden disasters. Earthquakes, floods, prolonged droughts, and drastic climate shifts have the power to dismantle even well-organized civilizations. When such events strike, the loss is not limited to buildings or populations. Knowledge itself can disappear just as quickly. Advanced skills often depend on stable systems. Engineering, specialized craftsmanship, and scientific understanding require time, training, and cooperation. If the structures that support education, communication, and record-keeping collapse, this knowledge becomes vulnerable. In extreme situations, survival takes priority, and complex practices may no longer be maintained or passed on. In many ancient cultures, knowledge was transmitted orally or through apprenticeship rather than written texts. This made it efficient in stable times but fragile during crises. If key individuals were lost or communities scattered, entire bodies of expertise could vanish within a generation. Later populations might inherit impressive structures or tools without understanding how they were created. Environmental change can also force societies to abandon regions altogether. When people migrate, they may leave behind technologies that are no longer practical in new environments. Over time, the original purpose and methods are forgotten, leaving only the physical remains as silent evidence of what once existed. These scenarios help explain why certain historical achievements appear isolated and unexplained. Rather than representing sudden miracles of innovation, they may be the final echoes of longer traditions erased by catastrophe. Disasters do not just interrupt history, they compress it, leaving behind fragments that appear advanced, mysterious, and disconnected from the timelines we try to reconstruct today. Not all historical inconsistencies come from lost knowledge or sudden collapse. Sometimes, the challenge lies in how evidence is dated, interpreted, or prioritized. Dating methods, while highly refined, are not infallible. They rely on assumptions, environmental conditions, and available samples. Small margins of error can significantly affect how an object is placed within a timeline. Beyond dating, interpretation plays a crucial role. An artifact may be classified based on familiar categories rather than its actual function. Tools can be mistaken for decorative objects, and symbolic designs can be misunderstood as purely artistic rather than practical. When evidence does not match existing expectations, it is often explained in the simplest way possible, even if that explanation leaves questions unanswered. There is also the issue of attention. Not every discovery receives the same level of study or public awareness. Some findings remain stored, unpublished, or briefly mentioned without deeper analysis. Limited funding, academic priorities, or lack of interdisciplinary collaboration can cause potentially important evidence to be overlooked. Cultural perspective further influences interpretation. Modern assumptions about what ancient societies were capable of can quietly shape conclusions. If advanced knowledge is not expected, signs of it may be dismissed as coincidence or exceptional talent rather than systematic understanding. These factors do not suggest intentional distortion, but they highlight the human element in historical reconstruction. History is built not only from evidence, but from decisions about what to emphasize and how to explain it. When evidence does not fit the timeline, it may not be wrong, it may simply be waiting for a better question to be asked. History tends to focus on civilizations that left extensive written records or clearly identifiable monuments. Yet many societies existed outside these conditions, leaving behind only fragments of their achievements. Over time, entire civilizations can fade from memory, known only through scattered ruins or unexplained artifacts that hint at a higher level of sophistication than expected. Some ancient settlements show signs of advanced organization, including planned layouts, efficient resource use, and complex social structures. These features suggest coordination and long-term thinking, even when little is known about the people themselves. Without written language or durable materials, their knowledge may survive only indirectly through what they built. As dominant cultures rise, they often absorb, replace, or erase those that came before them. In doing so, they may inherit technologies or ideas without preserving their origins. Later generations then attribute these advancements to the visible civilization, while the original source disappears from history. Environmental factors also play a role. Coastal cities, river-based societies, and low-lying regions are especially vulnerable to erosion and rising water levels. When these areas are lost, so is much of the evidence that could explain how advanced certain cultures truly were. Forgotten civilizations challenge the assumption that complexity belongs only to well-known historical powers. They suggest that human ingenuity has appeared in many forms, across different places and times. The absence of names and records does not mean the absence of achievement. Instead, it reminds us that history remembers selectively, and much of humanity's sophistication may remain hidden beneath layers of time. Modern perspectives often underestimate the intellectual abilities of ancient humans. Because their tools appear simple by today's standards, it is easy to assume their thinking was limited as well. Yet intelligence is shaped by environment, necessity, and experience, not by access to modern technology. Ancient societies faced complex challenges that required observation, planning, and deep practical understanding. Survival depended on reading natural patterns, seasons, stars, animal behavior, and environmental changes. Over generations, this knowledge accumulated into sophisticated systems of agriculture, navigation, architecture, and medicine. These systems may not resemble modern science, but they were highly effective within their contexts. Precision, memory, and problem-solving were essential skills, often developed to a remarkable degree. When ancient people built large structures, managed water systems, or aligned monuments with astronomical events, they demonstrated more than technical ability. They showed abstract thinking, long-term planning, and an understanding of cause and effect. These are signs of advanced cognition, even if the methods used differ from those of today. The lack of written explanations can make ancient achievements seem mysterious or accidental. In reality, much of their knowledge was experiential, passed through practice rather than theory. This form of intelligence leaves fewer records but is no less real. By reassessing ancient human intelligence, historical anomalies begin to look less impossible. Advanced artifacts and techniques may reflect minds that were highly capable, deeply observant, and finely adapted to their world. Underestimating those abilities risks misunderstanding the evidence they left behind and oversimplifying the true depth of human history. When all these anomalies are viewed together, they point toward a larger possibility. Our understanding of history may be incomplete. Timelines are built from the evidence that survives, not from everything that once existed. What remains is shaped by chance, by what materials endured, what locations were preserved, and what discoveries happened to be made. Absence of evidence is often treated as evidence of absence, even though time is rarely so fair. Inconsistencies do not automatically mean accepted history is wrong, but they do suggest it may be partial. Advanced artifacts, unexplained engineering, missing developmental stages, and sudden cultural declines all hint at stories that were interrupted or lost. These gaps create a version of the past that appears simpler and more orderly than it likely was. History is reconstructed backward, from fragments. Every new discovery has the potential to adjust, refine, or complicate existing narratives. When evidence does not fit neatly into the timeline, it exposes the assumptions behind that timeline. It forces historians and researchers to decide whether to question the evidence or the framework used to interpret it. An incomplete history is not a failure. It is an honest reflection of human limitations. The past does not preserve itself evenly, and much of it may be permanently out of reach. What survives are echoes, not full records. Understanding this allows room for uncertainty without turning it into speculation. These inconsistencies invite curiosity rather than conclusions. They remind us that history is not a finished book, but an ongoing investigation. Each anomaly is a clue, not to a single hidden truth, but to a past that was more complex, fragile, and dynamic than any single timeline can fully capture. As we step back and look at all these pieces together, a larger picture begins to form. Evidence that does not fit the timeline is not necessarily proof of hidden truths or forgotten eras, but it is a reminder that history is shaped by what survives, not by everything that once existed. Civilizations rose, adapted, and sometimes disappeared, taking their knowledge with them. What remains are fragments that challenge us to think more carefully about the past. These inconsistencies encourage humility. They show us that human history is not a straight path, but a fragile record shaped by loss, chance, and rediscovery. Each unexplained artifact or unexpected discovery invites us to keep questioning, keep learning, and remain open to the idea that the story of humanity is still unfolding. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, feel free to reflect on it, share it, or continue the conversation. Until next time, stay curious and we will see you in the next story.